Good evening, everybody. It's Monday, March 29th, 2021. My name is Mike Langford, and welcome back to another episode of DearBands Live, the podcast that explores the paths and stories of career-minded artists and music industry professionals. My guest tonight, like many great bass players, originally picked up guitar in high school, but quickly swapped it out for bass and started playing in bands. One of those high school bands became the platinum-selling hard rock band My Darkest Days, with a #1 song in the US about women who just love to dance. In 2013, My Darkest Days went on hiatus after lead singer Matt Walst was asked to join his brother Brad Walst's established platinum-selling band 3 Days Grace. Since then, my guest has kept busy writing, touring, and performing as a hired gun, session player, and as a member of hard rock bands Deadset Society, and most recently, Tense Machine. Please welcome my guest tonight, bassist, songwriter, and gardener, Brendan McMillan. Brendan.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing good.
Yeah.
I'll admit, I had some sharing to do before we got going tonight.
I saw you. I saw your busy little bee there.
Usually just a couple things to share, but tonight, special occasion. So there's like Tense Machine page, Deadset page, Sirius XM fan club page.
Yep.
Pretty much everywhere.
Share it up.
So how's things? What's new?
I was kind of chuckling because I was like, you asked me to be on the show, and I said, Mike, a bass player. Geez, you must be running out of people to interview here.
I have jokes that could go along with that, but at the same time, like one of the things that this kind of gets into real talk, but like one of the things is getting the perspectives from other musicians in the band, because often we just talk to the singers. You know what I mean? So like,
and
I like
a whole
having
other world of things going on in the background, right? There's all kinds of other stuff that all us people that are, so to speak, lurking around in the back in the rhythm section. There's all kinds of stuff we're taking care of that otherwise you might not know.
So I love having bass players and drummers and eventually keyboard players. I'll have everyone on here.
It's an essential part though. I mean, and it's all about supporting. That's always been my job, is like you as a bass player, especially. Bass is the ultimate support instrument. You're there to hold up everything and make everyone sound good. So that's it is. It's definitely a different perspective. So
yeah, musically and as a musician. Just
as a musician, there is a certain mindset, because I mean, you're on stage as a bass player, you pretty much know, you're like, everyone's not really looking at me or listening to me, but that's not the point of it though, too, right? Like you have to, it's sort of a mindset, and maybe that sort of bothers some people, that like what you're playing people aren't going to notice, whereas like I take that as a compliment. If you finish a gig, especially with people you don't know, no one says anything to you, I'll be like, that means I didn't do anything wrong.
I'm trying to think, because I think we've chatted about that, the idea of like some musicians where you're right, like we don't notice them because there's nothing that's like, what's the word we're looking for, like distracting in a way. Because like guitarists can be very distracting. Lead singers, obviously, like they're supposed to be getting the attention.
And that's their job, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but with like great drummers and bass players, or like keys players and as well, it's like great keys players, and you're just like, no one notices how great they are right now. But I'm trying to think, like, has there been a time when I've seen a band and like the bassist has been like notably bad? Because usually it's like it's good, or you just don't, it's not really their sort of thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, and there can be bass players like, obviously examples like Jaco Pastorius, and there's guys where like the bass is featured. but it's like a lead instrument though, so it's a totally different thing. And not that you shouldn't know melodies and lead stuff on bass, but it's like your main gig is like playing the root. And hey, what's cooler than the root note? That's like, when stuff gets a little crazy, and I'm guilty of that too. I learn all kinds of different music where obviously I want to learn more advanced stuff on the bass, but it's like you always got to remember your main job is holding it down, which
just hold it down
is sometimes more difficult, because obviously as a bass player you're always like kind of showered with like, oh well, jokes about bass kind of thing, right? But it's like but then it's always funny, because then you hand the bass to someone else and you're like, okay, no, you do it then if it's so easy. And try playing those 4 notes without making it buzz, and there's all kinds of little things that we practice that sort of either don't notice or get taken for granted. And then when people, I've had that happen a few times, people pick up my bass, and they play it and they're like, oh, this thing sounds like crap, it's all buzzy, and then I'll take it back and play them smooth, and they're
no, it's fine.
Oh, they're like, how did you do that? And I'm like, it's just infuriatingly small details. Yeah, it's the hands.
It's in the hands. It's in the hands.
I mean, it's the bass too. The Ernie balls are.
It's pretty nice.
You can't go wrong.
We could go more in depth on that, but that's going to be hour 2 or hour 3 of talking about basses. Because I see you've got a few guitars behind you.
Actually, there's Dane's guitar right there.
I was going to say you've got a guitar blocking all the basses right now.
Yeah, I mean, well, because for songwriting, I like to have a few like quick draw things. Like I have a bass behind me on a stand, and then the guitar right there, and that's kind of you just go in between those to sort of get things tracked before you forget them. I mean, that's always the struggle.
It's good to have things within close distance for tracking. That's for sure.
Right.
I was half joking. I'm just like, I was waiting for you to like pull a bass up and be like, I actually got another one just right here, because usually on live streams I see a bass that's around.
I kind of always do. Well, when Dane's playing, it's like I don't really get to play with people a lot anymore. So when he's doing the live stream and playing, I just pull up my bass and play along, and it's a great opportunity because, like I said last night, I was playing along, and it's like the Stain song, like a ballad, and I'm just playing like the Get You Fired bass lines, like just trying to just like you learn the chord progression the first time around, and then I'm like, okay, let's have fun, because I'm just playing along with Dane, but no one can hear me, so.
For context, we're referring to the Tense Machine Sundays at 6, where Dane plays some songs acoustically. So that was last night, because it's Monday. Yesterday was Sunday. I just got a shout out here. Jeremy Isbell says, "B is a master at his craft, a genius, always a rocker. Hell, he's a whole package." I was going to say too with Jeremy, because Jeremy sent a couple pictures, because he'll sit with this cajon and stuff and like play along to Dane's performances, and it makes me feel like I'm lazy over here because I'm just hanging out in the chat. And everyone's playing along with Dane. So maybe that's the thing. Maybe in the future, be one of those things where we get people to play along with Dane, and we'll just kind of like piece it together on the video.
Like a reaction video. And create different bands from.
Yeah, we could just have a big jam along. It could be a thing. We're innovating right now, Brendan.
That's right. Innovating the internet, one jam at a time.
So it's been a weird past 12 months for a lot of musicians. Like what have you been up to? Like what was kind of lay of the land for a session player last March?
Well, I mean, I do the most of my session stuff is like I just do live stuff for people, and it's weird to think about. Like I did a show with Andy for her CD release. My friend Andy just released a new album, actually. But we played at a venue in Toronto, and it was like just like any gig, and then a couple weeks later, no more of that. But I've done a few things for people for session stuff over the course of the pandemic. But it's tough because everyone doesn't have a lot of money to spend on that kind of thing. So there was there's definitely like it's slowed down a bit as far, because some projects that I was supposed to do got put on hold or whatever. But I mean not to say that, not to devalue myself, but I kind of just told a whole bunch of people, like, don't worry about paying me. Let's just
figure it out.
Let's just make music. I'll record the bass. Don't worry about it. Let's just get it done and get some music made, because I'm not gonna be that guy when I know they have no money and be like, well, it's sorry, can't help you out.
Well, go ahead.
I'd rather play on more albums. I'll figure out the money. I'm pretty resourceful, so I'll figure out the money later. It's like I'd rather get some music made and help people do that. So
I was going to say, yeah, like there's a bit of a balance there, and also like the way things have been. Like I know Burn Canada, the way things have been the last year, budgets tightened up a little bit because no one really knew what was going on. No one knew if they were going to keep their job. No one, like, there's so many variables with what was going on where like it definitely did make a lot of budgets a little bit screwy, and just people trying to be more mindful of what was going on. But I'm, firm believer, it's like if people really want to work together, they'll figure it out. If people are just trying to hire, this, in my world, like if someone's just getting the cheapest rate to do something, you generally want to just sidestep those gigs. But if you want to work together, you'll figure it out. So like, kudos on your end for going, just figure it out later. Let's just make music.
Yeah. And it obviously benefits me if I just can get more credits on more albums and more songs. I just want more experience just playing and whatnot. So it's always,
yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, so there's a company called Classic Albums Live, and near the end of because you were doing these gigs, I think the slogan or motto was note for note, cut for cut. But near this time last year when things started shutting down, they started trying to do some live stream concerts. With that, how was that transition from like playing in front of crowds that know these albums you're playing, like Pink Floyd and what was the other ones? Some of the other ones, Fleetwood Mac, Led Zeppelin.
I do a lot of Zeppelin and a lot of Pink Floyd stuff, and he usually gets me on any of the albums where they haven't done them before because I can learn it really quick, and I'll put the time in. They know how, because if someone's saying like we're gonna get up and we're gonna play these songs note for note, like I take that super seriously. Like if we're not going to do it, like it's basically a transcription live, and if it's not going to be, if everyone's not doing the transcription live, like I don't really want to do it. So which they're amazing and they're super serious about it, and a lot of these guys, especially the Zep band, like they've been playing these albums like that for like 15 years. So it's like, you know, when you step into that gig, it's like there's all those great things, especially like Zeppelin 2 is one of my favorites. All those little things are there. You know, the theremin and Whole Lot of Love, and like they all know these parts, so it just makes me really excited. I'm like, oh, this is great. What a cool way to play covers, essentially, right? So, but that was we played in Richmond Hill in early March last year, and I think we were doing The Wall. We were doing Pink Floyd. It was either The Wall or Dark Side of the Moon, and it unknowingly, like the last show in front of a full theater. It's always those nice, you know, those are great gigs. I've never played so many soft theater gigs in my life, and those are amazing venues. You know, you don't have the standing crowd, but it's like the acoustics in there are always great. There's so much room. There's not like 7 bands on stage before you.
Everyone borrowing your bass amp.
You get to set your gear up on stage and just leave it. That's amazing. Love that. But they started to, Craig had this idea, a theater in Belleville. He wanted to start doing some live streaming shows. So it's in a theater, and but there's no crowd in there. So it's just a big empty theater, which obviously makes, because you know how many times have we done sound check, and then you always kind of have it in the back of your head like, oh, but it'll sound better once people get in here. People are natural, sound
diffusers, diffusers, and absorb some sound.
Exactly, right. So then doing the sound check for the first one, and it's all echoey and ringing out, and we're like, oh, but that's how it's going to be. So we just have to and know people. You finish a song and it's just complete silence. So that's a little bit of a different vibe to it, which is still fine. But then also it's videotaped, so there's just a little bit of added pressure because you're like, if you screw up, it's on video. That was the other thing. So I mean, luckily, most of the albums that I did with them back, it was in the summer and then into, I think we went to like November doing these live streams. Mostly albums that I had done many times before. So
the first show without the crowd, what was kind of the tone after the show? Like, was it like that was weird? Or I
mean, everyone was like, that was kind of cool, but like, yeah, it was honestly, it was a little strange just because usually the crowds are pretty exuberant. So, playing a song and then it just ends and you're like,
we joke okay, being from
right.
Toronto. We joke that like, the Toronto crowd with their arms crossed and they don't really applaud, and it is what it is. But like to have nobody there, and also I've had this conversation with a few people on past shows where it's like we've all played those shows where there's like 2 or 3 people there, and you're still trying to make it a good time. But there's a massive difference between 2 people who want to see your band and 0 people really allowed in the venue.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it was. The response online was quite good from it, so you knew people were watching. We knew, especially the first, like there were a couple thousand people watching from all over North America. It's amazing how big that company is and how long they've been doing it. But it was a whole vibe unto itself. It is, as much as we're not, it was even different from those shows when there are like 5 people there, because at least there's someone there. This was like, it was just,
it's crew.
I mean, that's the new, I hate to say it, I hate this phrase, but the new normal. That's part of the new thing. I think we're going to see more of that for quite some time, even after everyone gets vaccinated. So, I mean, it's good on Craig for getting on it early and hopping on and doing that. So
you adapt, you try to find ways to make it work.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
Try things. So. Did you ever? Last question about the classic album shows. Did they ever talk about piping in the applause, the crowd noise?
No, Craig. No, not gonna happen. Someone brought it up and he shut it down immediately.
Because I've seen a couple like wife and I, we watched a few live streams and like different bands and stuff, and like some have piped in the audience, and like it's good. And talking to some of the artists after, like it's nice hearing it in your in-ears, because like it just reminds you that people are watching. And then actually watched I think it was a couple weeks ago, Danko Jones did his, and there was no crowd noise, but he was playing into it. And one of the things he said, he's just like, usually, silence after you play a song is a sound of disapproval, but we need to make sure we can hear you at home so that we can get approval. So it was just awesome. It was awesome because his banter is great, but how he's working the no crowd banter.
Backwards though, right? You're like,
yeah,
no, silence is good in this case, right? If we had people in here, where was it, at the Elmo? Or what, I don't know what venue it is, but if you had like crowd sounds in it, whatever city you're in, they'd start being, all right, we got to go check on this building. They have too many people in there.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, there was one too, and I won't go on too far, but with the Hives, that was another great live stream, but they had fans send in their like cheering. So they made a crowd track from the fans.
That's a good idea.
So there's a lot of times too where they had a few of them sampled, so you'd hear like the same sampled like woo sound and like like shout out sound, stuff like that. So it was pretty fun. But again, it's just people, bands are just try things right now because people are home and they are watching and they will pay for it.
Yeah.
So it just gets down to supply and demand when it comes to the cost of something, the cost of an event. It's one thing to have, be part of, kind of ranting for a second. It's like one thing to be part of it live. It's another thing to just watch the replay. But when you can interact, especially with the chat, like even with DearBands Live, we have a chat and people are hanging out in it right now. And it's like, we can communicate while a show is going on. You can't really do that when like a big rock concert's going on because it's too loud. Mm-hmm. Communication is basically like, excuse me, and trying to order a drink. But like the chat, so there are some upsides to it, but I just thought that was interesting that Classic Albums was trying to get the online the live streams going early on, because I'm like, you know what, that could be a thing, and hopefully, it would be nicer if it could have carried on the whole year, because the more bands could have got into these venues and stuff. I think it would have been good, but.
Yeah, and I mean, that's when I have people that don't work in any sort of performing industry at all. They say like, oh, like, what are you guys going to do going forward? And I say, my answer is always like, oh, don't worry. As soon as people can go back out to concerts again, they will be there. Because people that like to go do that, like they live for those shows, right? And they're always, maybe people that don't do that, they're always kind of like, there might not be live shows like there have been anymore. And it's like, yeah, don't worry. As soon as we can, we will. And the people will come that enjoy those kind of things. So, yeah.
No, I was thinking a little bit about that too. 'Cause like the idea of going out for entertainment, there's people who go to the movies, but they might be kind of comfortable now not watching on the big screen after, but it's like people who go to shows. People who go to festivals, concerts, cruise, like festival, like people who go to those things, they're not going to stop anytime soon once things are open. They're not going to be like, oh, it was nice staying home. It's like, no, they want to go.
The screen is not enough. You can have the biggest sound system, like home stereo system, and a 75-inch TV or something enormous, and watching shows, and like it'll always be not good enough. Whereas maybe if you go to the movies all the time, maybe the 75-incher and a big screen, you'd be like, well, this isn't half so bad.
Yeah, I'm good.
Why do I have to go to the movie theater anymore? But yeah, people with shows, like there's just a whole, there's a certain breed of people. There are people that go to rock shows and people that go to see live music. There's a whole vibe to it. There's like, even if it's a stinky bar, maybe they just, smelling that stench reminds them of the bar, or, like draft beer.
Got their locals.
There's all like little things about shows that you kind of forget about. And I'm sure when we go and play another show, it's going to be like, oh yeah, oh yeah, this is all these.
Yeah, it'll come back. It's just, and well, then again, it's like being in Canada is different because down in the States we're seeing there's a lot of tours were announced the last couple of weeks as well, and fingers crossed everything goes the way that it needs to go, and it's safe and it works for everybody. But it's the concerts will come back. But I also not to go back full circle, but I do feel like there was a lot of ground covered and a lot of tech that was pushed and evolved the last year to allow bands to do these live streams and build on this. And to anyone that's listening, it's like, just because we get shows back, don't stop some of the things that you're doing right now, because lots of people will quit and it's just going to open up way more market share for you if you do have live streams and stuff like that. That's my mini rant for that. Just want to let's roll back the calendar for McMillan here.
Let's go back in time.
When did you start playing bass?
So it started pretty early for me. I mean, I have a quasi musical family. My parents either of them didn't really play it, although they both really enjoy music. My uncle Jim was always a big influence because he's one of those guys where he can just pick up kind of any instrument and hear a song once, and he's like, oh yeah, and he just starts playing it. Accordion, guitar, mandolin, anything with strings, and especially that accordion. He can just kind of hear anything. So I remember watching him as a kid. Whenever we'd have family or something, they'd start going, and they play a lot of like folk songs. He loves like Newfoundland like folk music, good old beer drinking music kind of thing. So they'd be cranking those kind of tunes out. So it always that was the first kind of inspiration, because I'd see him see them playing, and it's like, wow, that looks really fun. I want to be able to do that on something, So when we were kids, my dad worked at GM in Oshawa, and he had a friend, and he gave us he said, here, take this home for your boys, and it was one of those a Yamaha folk guitar, the one with the 3 nylon strings and the enormously huge neck on it. So when I was in grade school, I think we had I always say that was my first instrument, but it wasn't really. What really my first instrument that I really got into was the recorder.
The recorder.
The recorder, because we started playing that in like grade 3 or 4 or 5, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And like I have to say, I got really into it once I figured out how to read the music and make the sound come out of the recorder. I was hooked. I was like, wow, that's so cool. I remember getting up early in the morning and propping the book up on like the couch and going downstairs and like getting a few minutes in the shed before I would go, and go down and catch the bus, because I was like, oh, this is like it's funny to think about it, but playing like 3 Blind Mice and Cuckoo and all these like simple songs on a recorder, it was the first thing that kind of got me into music,
really?
Right? And then I started to hear sounds on the radio, and once I figured out how to play off the page, you'd hear something and kind of try to find the notes on the recorder. It was like, oh, that's cool. And then you make the connection where we had a piano. We had one of those old upright pianos, and you'd start hitting the keys, and they'd match up, and you're like, well, this is B flat and that's B flat. Oh, I get it. I'm like, okay, all right. So, but yeah, coming from, I grew up in a really small town of Norwood, and I even grew up outside of that town. So, summers and holidays, it was like you couldn't go outside and, go down the street and see your friend or something like that. It was just like hayfields. So you spent a lot of time outside. And, I had one of my mother's friends, Mary Knox was her name, and she was sort of one of the town's piano teachers. She sort of taught us a few things. She gave us a few lessons on piano. When we were little kids, she'd drive us to school, so we'd sit there and she'd teach us, like, exactly like, this is B flat major. I think that's one of the first things, like just like the major scale up and down, and we learned like exactly like chopsticks and a few little tunes like that. But the first stringed instrument that led to the bass guitar was I had this old Yamaha folk guitar with this huge long thick neck, and we had a class in school, and they'd teach us chords, and I actually remember taking like a group lesson with the class, and we're all playing chords, and I remember, and the teacher said like, okay, you're not going to really hear this at first, but like just give it. And he gave us like he taught us like G, D, and A or C or something like that, like 3 just like basic chords. And I remember everyone strumming along, and a bunch of the kids were saying like, oh, I can't tell the difference when the chords change. And I kind of thought that for a second, and then like the second or third time through the chords, I was like, oh, and then you make the connection, because you're like that C triad on the piano, and you play it on guitar and you're like, oh, okay, now I get that, right? But that was, growing up in a small town like that, and it's like we had, 3 Days Grace. They were called Groundswell. They were from the same little town. It's like Norwood had an oddly really high number of musicians. Like everybody played music, everybody played guitar. It very, you know what I mean? It was a strange. And I remember growing up and hearing some of the older kids being like, "Oh, our town is so great. Everyone plays music. There's so many bands," kind of thing, right? But also what I noticed when I was a kid, I think I was about 10, and I was like, everybody plays guitar. Not everybody plays bass. So if I just go right to bass and try to get really good at that, I'll get to play with whoever I want. And it worked. So I was, so I think it was like I was, grade 4 or 5. Parents said, "What do you want for Christmas?" And, me and my brother both said drums. And they were like, absolutely not. So my brother had an electric guitar, and that was another reason my older brother played guitar. So I wanted to play music, but I also had to do something different that was my own, because he was really good at guitar. So I'm like, I can't compete with that sort of thing, right? And so I got a bass guitar, and I remember that first day sitting down at Christmas, and I didn't know what I was doing, but just hitting open strings. My brother was playing songs and just trying to find fret that made not a not awful sound, basically, and trying to match those up, sort of thing. So that's where it kind of started. But and to say like it worked, I got to play with whoever I wanted. That's how I started playing music with Matt Walst, the singer for My Darkest Days, and we sort of played in this proto version of My Darkest Days. But I was I was like a kid. I was like grade 7 or 8. My brother was older, already in high school, and he said like, "Look, we need like someone who can play bass." And he's like, all of our friends just play guitar. And they'd have them over and try to play bass, and they're like, "Well, that's not your thing," sort of. So my brother would be like, "Hey, my little brother plays bass guitar," and then, you can imagine it was like Matt and our friend Jesse and my older brother, and they're kind of like, "Oh, your little brother, man, really?" kind of thing. Like, you're gonna bring your little brother over? But I went and played with them, and I just tried to learn. Never heard these songs before. They just kind of like jump in, whatever, start playing. And I was able to pick them up, after the first time through. I could like play along, and they were like, "Oh wow, you can play that thing." So it was like, okay. And I think it was the first bass. It was like, it looked like a P bass, but it said like VMP on it, and it was, after a while when I got a little older, it was very obviously the letters of PV just like mixed around and matched, and like someone got some P bass kits and threw them together and was like, "I need a name. Oh, I have all these PV decals, let's stick those on," kind of. But I still have it. It's still here in a case somewhere. It still works.
I want to hop in for 2 seconds. There's two things I want to bring up, but you just brought up something I just thought of. Where people find some of these instruments, these weird left to center instruments where like it's not a Strat, it's not a P bass, it's not it looks like it, but it's like, where did you find this thing? Because if you go to music store, you kind of see one of a half dozen different types of instruments, but guitars, you find some really oddball guitars sometimes that people learned on. And you're like, where did you find this?
Where did you find this? And especially in smaller towns like Peterborough, like where we grew up. And that was, I was taking lessons at Bud Monahan's, and that was at the time when it was in the house. It was at the dude's house in the basement, and they had all the little lesson rooms or whatever. And that's, that's looking back, that's what it must have been. Someone had a bunch of P-bass kits, and they just sort of threw it together. And I say P-bass because it looked like it. It wasn't really like, from far back, if you squint your eyes, you're like, "Yeah, it's a P-bass." And then if you really
P-bass.
looked at it, you'd be like, "Oh,
it's not a P-bass."
It's not. The pickups are in the same spot, and it has the same pick guard shape, but not really. So, but yeah, that's sort of how the journey started with playing in bands with people, was really with Matt Walst, our friend Jesse, and my older brother, and we were just trying to make songs. And it's funny, we have some recordings of them. We always played at like assemblies at high school once I got a little older and whatnot. And it's funny, I played an assembly, and I was playing in the concert band at high school, but I was also playing with our like rock band, our heavy band. We were and I think at that time we were basically like, we're pretty much a Deftones cover band with some originals sort of sprinkled in, but we were really into like Deftones and Slipknot, and I loved Tool already, kind of thing. But I remember going and like playing, and we played with the guys, and I bought this like coveralls, like a big gray jumpsuit. You can tell I loved Slipknot, so I was like just put this like jumpsuit on me and my brother. And I don't think we had masks, but we both did like something crazy with our hair or something and put these like jumpsuits on. I just remember going backstage and taking my bass and taking the jumpsuit off, putting like my formal band wear on, and a bunch of the other band members helped me because I think it was Christmas or something, and they just like stuck a whole bunch of Christmas stuff on my bass. And then I come out, sit down with the concert band and start doing the hits, start playing the classics.
Time for Christmas bass.
But that was really my first introduction. I remember my mother commenting, she's just like, wow, you're a busy guy, you got like multiple gigs with these different bands kind of thing. And I think after a couple years too, I started another band with my friends, and we basically wanted to be Rush or Tool or something like that. We wanted to play progressive music, so we kind of did. I had this like instrumental prog band, I think, and it blows my mind because we recorded a couple times with James McKenty in Peterborough. James is a sort of producer, an engineer in Peterborough. He's been around. He's been recording bands for a couple decades, because this was like, I want to say this was 2000 or something when we recorded with him, but it's still up on the internet. I plugged in the website the other day. It's like a Wix website, and this music that we recorded like 20 years ago as teenagers is still just randomly up there on this Wix website.
That is awesome.
So it's kind of a trip. It's like 14, 15-year-olds in the studio kind of thing. But
I want to bring up one more point before we can move on. The value of environment, because you mentioned with the Peterborough area, like it seemed like it was a bit of a hotbed, because there was, groundswell became 3 Days Grace,
and that's just Norwood, exactly. Not to mention Peterborough. There were so many. We would go to Peterborough, and like us Norwood folk, that for a while, that was going to the city for us. So when you go to the city and we'd play, I think we played a couple times. We rented out Market Hall once or whatever, and we had all these bands from Peterborough, or we'd go play Battle of the Bands, or like play just random gigs around Peterborough, and there'd be all like there were so many bands, and I see a lot of those people still playing music, which is amazing, right? So
well, that's the thing, like not to go to memory lane, but it's like when I was in high school, there was tons of bands, and kind of the cool thing to do for a lot of people in high school was to be in one of those bands. And half jokingly, like, yes, I started out as a drummer, but I realized that no one had a bass player. So I also hopped over to bass.
There you go.
And started, so that was my way to get into bands and start playing stuff. But yeah, there was tons of bands. There's different levels of bands. And I just think there's a lot of value when you look around and you have people that are doing something well. Because I remember the music store, I did a high school co-op at Ed's Music. And John, I think he did Saturdays and Wednesdays there, he was in a band called Electroshine. And I remember when 3 Days Grace got signed, it split the community into like two groups. The people who were like really excited for them, and then the haters. Because the haters are like, why them? Like, why not all these other bands? But I remember John, like we were talking about to him, he was just like, it's awesome because like people are going to be looking here for other bands. And like, not to say this led to it, but Electroshine ended up getting one of their songs in like a movie and like doing LA stuff. And like, it started kind of snowball a little bit. And I just remember like that energy that I got from him was just like, he was excited. He knew the guys in the band, but he's really excited for them. But this is like at the beginning of 3 Days Grace's journey. And I'm just always kind of kept that with me. It's like, well, you can be a hater on stuff, or you can be excited that now there's a spotlight on what's going on.
And like, there's always a reason why those people, like 3 Days Grace, like them, and I remember that being a kid and hearing some sort of similar sentiment with some of the older people in the town, because it'd be like, why them? There's other people in bands. And I sort of had a unique perspective, and I remember being at like a party or something. I don't know where it was, but some people were not hating, but they were kind of like criticizing and being like, why them? There's lots of bands that are good. And I'm like, yeah, but those guys would come over to like, and we would like be jamming at Matt's parents' house, and 3 Days Grace would jam there sometimes. They had a bunch that was great for us. We were kids, and that was like my first big bass amp that I played through, because Brad's stuff would be there, and he'd kind of be like, "Hey, don't break it," and I'm like, "Yeah." No. But they were always like Brad, especially with me. He was always super like, he would give me strings, he would give me like all kinds of just little stuff that for him he was like, whatever. He just like, I was gonna throw this out. And I remember him. They would come over to our jam space, and he gave me like this pack of strings, and it was like because bass strings were expensive. So they're like 40, $50 a set. Someone gives you a pack of strings. When I was a kid, I was like, oh, like
it's like
hell,
10 packs of guitar strings, basically.
I was like, oh man, I get to play. I just remember playing that bass and having strings on for like years and being like, oh, they're getting pretty bad. Kind of. So when someone gives you a new set of strings, I'm like, dude, you just changed my life. Kind of. And him sort of being like, I remember him saying, he's like, dude, it's just a pack of strings. Because I
don't
was
understand.
Like, man. I'm like, yeah, you don't get it. You don't understand, man. That's $50 I get to save for the fair or something, but people would say like, oh, why 3 Days Grace? But they would come over to our jam space and play, and we would like play them a couple songs, and they'd be like, oh, that's cool. And I remember one time like handing Brad my bass. He's kind of joking. He's like, oh, we're gonna play on your guys' stuff, and they played like Home and some of the songs that they were getting ready to record for the first 3 Days Grace album. I just remember sitting there and sitting back, and they're like, just remembering how we sounded and then how they sounded on our gear. And I just remember sitting back and being like, holy crap, like those guys were amazing, and they were so young, and they were incredible, and they made this crappy, like my crappy little starter P bass, they made all this gear sound amazing. So when people would say like, oh, why them? And I'm like, yeah, you don't realize like those guys have put in so much time. Because I thought when we were kids, I'm like, we would just try and jam and practice as much as we possibly could outside of school. And it's like those guys, they had just, there's that Malcolm Gladwell book, Outliers. Like they'll talk about 10,000 hours. Like they had put in that time before they got signed. For sure they had. Like I'm sure you could even go back now with experience and listen to those jam sessions and be like, they were amazing back then. So. There's always there's always a reason why those guys are like where they are, right? So
kind of leading from there. So we've got this community, we've got this environment, we've got these bands. So Matt Walst is the singer for My Darkest Days, and then Brad, his brother, is in 3 Days Grace. What's it like being in a band with somebody whose brother is in another band that's becoming very successful? Like what was it like between the two bands?
Well, I have to say, there was like a lot of hate. There would be a lot of like other people. No, seriously, there were. We'd play these things, and there's like an expectation. They're like, oh, well, if his brother's in 3 Days Grace, like you guys better be amazing. And we definitely knew that. Angle. And we would practice so much for these like shows in the gym. For like, I think we had a show that the teachers were great in Norway. They organized a concert for us. They called it Nor Woodstock, which was great. But it was a great opportunity for people to get up and play. And like Mr. Sherwin, one of the teachers, he put like a super early like Pro Tools like recording rig together. So we got to learn how to like record stuff. I mean, it was very rudimentary. We just basically had a stereo channel and a couple of mics, and it was like, all right, let's try to not make these clip sort of thing, right? And try to get everything in it, sort of. I remember there was a lot of like, it was very competitive. There were a lot of bands, and like a lot of people were really good, especially in Norwood, like in this little high school of like 700 kids. There was a lot of people, but there was like a mixed thing, because it was a lot of like, exactly that, like, oh, like your brother's in 3 Days Grace, so you guys are going to have it easy kind of thing, which we definitely did not. Like, after high school, Matt and the guys, they were like 4 years older than me, so they were long out of high school and sort of doing the college thing. And then I had my band that we sort of, but everyone sort of split up, and everyone else didn't really pursue music except me. I went and I auditioned at Humber. I didn't get in the first year, but I studied and got into the actual proper music program the next year. So I went and I bought an upright bass. I was always very interested in jazz when I was a kid. So, but obviously had never really played it before. So I went in and just kind of took the plunge and went to Humber. And if I was, I remember a teacher saying too, he's like, oh, it's sort of asking me, he's like, where'd you come from? It was my first private teacher, Will Jarvis, and he was a sweetheart of a guy, but he's like, where'd you come from? Blah, 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 asking. He's just like, oh, he's like, I bet you're kind of like, you're sort of you had all this experience in your hometown, so you're sort of one of the better players in your town. And I'm like, I don't know about that, but I definitely like got some experience. And he's like, okay, well, it's good you came here, because it's going to knock you down a few pegs. And it's like, oh, it did. There were some like unreal players who were like younger than me, and just learning jazz. Like I was totally out of my element, but it was a great thing, because it lights a fire under you and just makes you learn. Like I had so much catching up to do, right? I just didn't have that experience. And obviously being like a smaller town high school, we didn't have like, there weren't so many people that were super serious about concert band and music class and like Dixieland jazz bands. So it's like I didn't really get a lot of, you know, that stuff when I was in high school. So going to like a jazz school and you have all these people where their music programs in high school were amazing. They'd already played a bunch of jazz standards and, you know, they could already walk and do all this stuff. It was like, it was a definite learning curve, but I jumped right in. I loved it. So it was like, it wasn't a chore to learn it by any means, but yeah, it definitely kicked my butt for sure. But it made me a better player. Like I would not be where I am if it was not for going to school and learning music like that, because it was an unreal experience. But after a couple years at Humber, it ended up it was at the Lakeshore campus down by the lake in Toronto, and the guys, and it was My Darkest Days at this point, had a rehearsal spot right down the street. So isn't that convenient? So I would go right from Humber. I remember this too. I'd be like playing, you know, jazz at Humber or whatever, and then I'd go to the guy's house. So I'd put the 4-string bass away and I'd grab the 5-string bass and still tune it down and start playing like riff rock kind of thing. And we started to just put that band together, right? Which was, and it was we're talking like 2005 or 2006. That's crazy to say that. That's a long time ago now. But we had this rehearsal space, and it had no windows on the walls, and it just had skylights in the ceiling. And it was like it actually was the rehearsal factory at Lakeshore in Islington, but it was like a live-in jam space, if you call that living. So it had a big room, a washroom, a little kitchenette on the side, and 2 little bedrooms. And I eventually moved into that and it was funny because my older brother had a room. He's like, well, you're moving in with me kind of thing. So it's like I, you know, went through high school, moved out, went to college, and then moved back into a room with my brother. It's just sort of a funny thing, but it's like we had a blast. It was a good time. My older brother was the original guitarist for My Darkest Days. He didn't actually end up sticking around with the band. He took a different path. He's an electrician now. It kind of wasn't for him, but I stuck it out. So it was My Darkest Days was, and I've been posting some pictures on the My Darkest Days page. I found a bunch of them recently from I found an old email. I finally remember the password. Found all these old photos, and My Darkest Days was a 3-piece for a while. Just Matt and Doug and I, which was and you know, incidentally, our band Tense Machine. I love 3-pieces. I love 3-piece rock bands. And like I said, like one of my favorite bands growing up, I loved Rush when I was growing up. So it's like I was, you know, sort of in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, I want to be Rush. So it's like whenever I'm in a 3-piece, I'm just like, and we're doing it. But yeah, we sort of, but we took our time, and I remember that too. Like, you know, it was My Darkest Days. Like, you know, our first American tour and our first song at radio was like 2010. Like it took like 5 years to sort of get there. And Mike, I remember you even saying like you were rehearsing with a band or something at Lakeshore in Islington, and you said you saw like us, we were like loading out, I remember you thinking like, oh, that's My Darkest Days. Like, man, they're still at it. Like it was like, you know, years after sort of the first.
The backstory for that is I think it was it was maybe 2007 maybe. Yeah. I was producing a band. We're doing pre-production, and we were just chatting outside after, and I'm pretty sure you were loading back in, like you just finished or whatever. So I think the rehearsal factory is like you have to do your stuff before midnight basically. And and Carlos was like, oh, it's My Darkest Days. I remember looking over and was like, wow, like just still going. Cause there's another story where, like, not to go into it, but I was asked about drums indirectly through a couple lines, like really, really early on about that kind of stuff. And it's just like, it's weird when you see that. And then eventually, like, not to fast forward too far, but it's like when you see things start taking off for a band, it's like, you can say there's 5 years between, you know, 2005 and 2010, but you've already explained all the years before that as well. When you talk about those 10,000 hours, it's like people don't take that into consideration. You know, getting a bass guitar at, you know, 10 years old or whatever it is, or like even starting there, you are putting time in. Even if you're not putting like grade A quality time in, you're still having time on the instrument.
That's right. And all of that time sort of adds up, right? And
it does.
Yeah, I remember that initial buzz in like 2006, 2007, and we thought, we're like, oh man, this is going to happen soon. And then another year went by. And then another year went by, and people were like, this is going to be, 2008, this is going to be your guys' year. And another year goes by, and then another year goes by. It was like, it took a long time. And like, we were slugging it out. Like, we had Matt's parents bought us a minivan to use, and we had one of Brad's old bass amps. And of course it was the 810 Ampeg fridge. So behind the two seats in the Dodge Grand Caravan, we'd slide that bass amp in.
Of course you need that.
Drums in the back, guitar amp, and it was like all just rammed in there. Chizzy driving, keeping us alive. The three of us just, surviving in the back of that van. But we had great times too. But yeah, that was just like playing every, I call those the 401 tours, from Windsor to Montreal up to Quebec City. We would just go every weekend whenever we could and just play. And then I would go back to school and learn jazz during the week kind of thing. But it was, and rehearsal factory, you could rehearse, you could make noise from 12 till midnight, 12 hours of the day without any noise complaints, which in Toronto is like a miracle. Where else do you get that? And not to say that we got a lot of hate in the Toronto scene, but you could tell there was like people being like, why them? There's lots of bands that are good in Toronto. Why are these guys getting label attention? Why are they having, Ralph James, the agency group and everything at all their shows, like sort of interested in this group? And it was like, not to say we were doing more than other people, but like we kind of were, because that was like we were super disciplined at it. And that was sort of the rule. You could be in school or you could have a job or do something during the daytime, but like 6 p.m. till midnight, we were going to rehearse. We're going to try and write stuff, and we're going to play our songs, and we're just going to be as tight as we could. So while other people were out partying and drinking, we would make this effort. Like sometimes if we didn't have shows on the weekend, we would literally just stay in this crummy little apartment and just rehearse for as long as we could. So we put in that time after time after time after time. So when people were like, oh, why you guys? I'd be like, well, like, holy crap, like something's got to give.
Well, there's that thing of when people say, why you? It's just like, well, why not? Why not us? You've put the time, because a lot of things can just not work out. It's one of those things too. Like there's a lot of things with bands, artists in general, like so many things can line up, but not line up enough. And then there's other times where like things just kind of align and then it's going, sort of thing. But that's always my first thing would be like, well, why them? Well, why not them?
And people would, there'd always be the sentiment too, like, oh, your singer's older brother is in 3 days.
Exactly.
You guys are going to have like an easier time with it. Exactly the opposite. In fact, everyone's expectations of Matt and the rest of the band was we had to be perfect. We had 3 days grace to learn from. So we, as far as they were concerned, we had a leg up and we had information that they didn't have, which we kind of did. But at the same time, we're like, holy crap, like be a little easier. Like Ralph James, the president of the agency group at the time, he would come to all our shows, and he would if we weren't like absolutely perfect, and he'd come to the stage at the end of every show and come up and be like, nope, not yet. Nope, not yet. It was like years in, and we're like, when are we gonna crack this guy to get us shows, to start booking us? When are we gonna get something? Because like everyone was really, really hard on us, which looked like it was good for us. But like, yeah, they were not going to let us have anything. They weren't going to hand us anything. Like we had to work really, really hard for everything, which probably pushed us forward as well. Right. So
during that time, was there because again, there's that hope of like, okay, this is going to be the year. This is going to be the year. Mm-hmm. During that time, was there ever those seeds of doubt kind of in the camp, just being like, you know what, maybe it's not going to happen?
I mean, I think there's always like it could like nothing, especially in the music industry. Like you're not owed anything. The world doesn't owe you anything. You're just because you go to school for music, just because you have a band, and there's this sort of expectation. Like it can always not happen, right? It's one of those things where it's extremely it's sort of uncertain, right? So, but I mean, whatever you just do whatever you can to sort of make sure, like, as long as, we're practicing, we're writing, we're putting, we're thinking about the band, you just got to try and do all the things that you can, like control, just with the things that you can control, just do those. And the rest is like, well, if it didn't work out, at least I can say, if My Darkest Days didn't work out, we did everything we could. Like we really like tried everything we could, and we're very lucky that it did, because even, fast forward, a couple years later in 2009, 2010, we're driving around New York City with Chief and Joey Moy, and we're showcasing for all these labels and stuff like that, and we pretty much got turned down by most major labels in New York City. Like everyone, like we showcased for, I met so many people, right? But everyone, rock was sort of on a decline. It was a weird time in the music industry, and sort of people weren't, so keen to take a chance on a new rock band, and it was just an off chance that L.E. Reid, like Island Def Jam, they called, and they literally just wanted acoustic guitar and singing, and they were the ones that ended up signing My Darkest Days. So, and it was like not a planned showcase whatsoever. It was just sort of random, last minute. Hey, someone called Chief and was like, "Oh, I hear you're in town with this band. Just come up and meet and play a couple songs acoustic," kind of thing, right? And that's what did it. It was something that wasn't planned. Like we had a totally different plan for all these different people, and it just sort of worked out in this weird random way, right? But then it's like, okay, now it's on. Now we can make something happen. And I mean, none of that, we wouldn't have even got to that point without Chad Kroeger, because he heard some of the demos, and I think it was actually Brad. 3 Days Grace is on tour with Nickelback, and Brad was like, "Oh, just sort of in passing, like, hey, it's my little brother's band, listen to the music." And it was like a year and a half later, just randomly, Matt gets a phone call. "Hey man, it's Chad Kroeger." And at first Matt like hung up on him, because he's like, "Screw you, Chizzy, you're playing a trick on me," kind of thing, right? And like hung up the phone. And then he calls back and he's like, "Who or what is a Chizzy?" And no, this is actually Chad Kroeger. I remember Matt like turns and he has his flip phone and he's like, "Dude, it's actually him." I was like, "Oh my God." So we all go quiet, and Matt sort of just like goes in the other room and talks to him or whatever. And Chad was like, you can record. Chad had an amazing recording studio at his house, and agreed to just on spec be like, "Let's make an EP or a record or whatever we can get together, and then we'll try it through 604 Records to get you in the US." So we really kind of won the lottery with that, because we got signed in Canada and the US. Basically, it was like 604 Records and Island Def Jam, Mercury, basically, David Massey, right? So yeah, that was. But I mean, that's when the real work begins. But at least at that point, it was like we got rid of our rehearsal space in the city. We're like, we don't really need to be here anymore. We just need to sort of, like, we had a very limited budget. So we're like, if we just go outside of the city, we could pay rent, not have to work, and we could just really like get this together for our first American tour. So that's what we did. We went out to Pickering. We bought this house. So it's like, suburbs, all little families, and all these freakazoids start loading this gear in. But that was honestly one of the best ideas we ever had, because we got this house and the whole basement was just open, and it had a fake wall of 2x4s, nothing else, just concrete blocks and just 2x4s, and about a foot away from the wall. So we went down to the local end of the roll carpet store, and we filled the trailer up with old cut off pieces. All the contractors would come, and all the odd pieces of new carpet just in these random shapes, and they would just throw it in this big bin. And so we went to the guy at end of the roll, and usually you have to pay for that. And I think the guy kind of like was amused / felt sorry / was like, "Oh, cool," kind of thing. But he's like, "Yo, this has been out back, and the pieces are brand new. You have to figure that out for yourself if they've been used in a house." We didn't really care, so we just filled our trailer up with all these random pieces of carpet, and just like floor, walls, ceiling, just coated the whole thing. And we would play in there like full concert volume, and you'd go in front of this house, and it would sound like someone had a stereo on low. So we're like, great, there we go. We just made
Perfect.
our rehearsal spot. So we would just start. I think we had showcases. We'd have people come from, Pearson Airport. We'd have a van pick them up and drive them to Pickering, to the suburbs of this house. And they'd be like, "Where are we going?" And then as soon as you would go downstairs, they'd be like, we'd like make like a bar in our basement, basically, right? Like a concert venue. And we'd showcase in our basement, right? It was hilarious, but it was, I think even Joey Moy commented once. He's like, "What a great use of resources." He's like, instead of going and renting out some bar, we're just doing it. It's like in your house, right? So, and that was always the kind of thing. Like if you just removed those barriers of like, say if you work in the daytime, you go home, and then you got to like get home after work and then go to the rehearsal spot. But if the rehearsal spot is your house, just like go and eat something really quick, and then you could put more of that time to use, basically. So
it's interesting because again, you're talking about the idea of you've got a house. The band basically lives there. Mm-hmm. You rehearse there. You're keeping your overhead low. I've seen a few bands where, like, say there's 4 people in the band, 1 or 2 of them work, and the rest of the band works on band stuff all day. So it's like a family. It's like everyone, because you still need money coming in, but the idea for the greater good, it's like 1 or 2 people go and work their job to pay the bills, keep the lights on, sort of thing. But there's so many things that bands can be doing, where it's like you're not just sitting around playing video games all day and just hanging out. It's like there's lots of work to do. And I'd say, like, now more than ever, with the amount of stuff you can be doing online, having that time, that human hours that you can put into stuff.
And there was this, it's funny too, that reminds me, there's an old picture from the Islington rehearsal space too, where it's like, I probably don't want to show that onto the internet. It's quite honestly filthy there. And there was just so much stuff in there, but it was the early days of the internet, mid 2000s, right? So it's like, and it was a picture, I think it's like Matt, like goofing around, like making like, Mr. Noodles or something we bought at Byway. Like we'd buy all this like horrible cheap food, as cheap we could buy. And it was kind of a contest to see who could get the most hilarious cheap item from the Byway that was right around the corner or whatever. And in the background of this picture, there's like 3 old PCs lined up, and they all had our MySpace page up on them. We would literally sit there, Matt, Doug, and me, and we would just go on MySpace because there wasn't any limits how you could message and spam or
it was the hack.
Whatever. It was the hack, and we would all sit there and just plug away at MySpace. Talk about those early days of social media, right? But that was it was hilarious to see that. I'm like, oh yeah, we would spend hours sitting there just, pretty much just spamming people.
Promoting the band. The band, yes.
Back when Toronto had more, it was probably usually at the Cathedral or the Reverb at Queen and Bathurst, right? Mm-hmm. Back when Toronto had more music venues. Because it's funny to think of it, though. There were all these little bars that we used to, and Chizzy, our sort of band manager guy at the time, driver, booker, everything person, Chizzy would get us enough gigs, and a lot of times they'd just be at different venues in Toronto, and it would a lot of times pay rent. We were really lucky, like we were like this like rock band playing the same 10 songs over and over again, and we were paying our rent from playing just shows around the city, or go to Chatham, go to Peterborough, I think there was a couple years where the Red Dog had a big part playing and paying our bills, right? So but and all this time, like, that seems like that's like a mountain of time, and all this stuff happened, and that's before we even, as My Darkest Days, set foot in the US. That's before Porn Star Dancing, that's before any of that sort of happened, right? So I think it was 2010 early, it was like February or something, and we went and we one of our first big trips, we went and filmed the video. They're like, oh, we want to film a video for Porn Star Dancing, this song that we had. So we're like, okay.
I want to stop you for 1 second before we start talking about that. Did you hear the demo for that song first, or did you kind of just hear it in motion, or when's the first time you really heard that song?
I heard a really super early version of Porn Star Dancing, and it was our friend Ted Bruner had made this keyboard part, that sort of with that effect that you hear. Like, that was the first seed of that song.
That was the Inspirato?
That was the Inspirato. That's the first thing I got, was pretty much just that keyboard part going, and Matt and Chad just like riffing, about strippers. They were like, let's make something about strippers, kind of thing, right? And it sort of went from there. But that was the Inspirato. It was Ted, and it was Ted's. And Ted Bruner, by the way, is a amazing writer. He's written for Katy Perry, or if you've heard "Hey There, Delilah" by the Plain White T's, that was a Ted song.
Ted tune.
Yeah, that's a Ted tune. So Ted sort of came up with that, and I remember hearing that, and it was like, and the first time we were sort of practicing it along to those tracks, and that's pretty much all it was. I remember here before, like, they got Zakk Wylde for this guitar solo, and they had Ludacris and everything. And I remember sitting, and I don't know where it was, Chizzy and I were out driving somewhere, and we were just listening to it over and over again, because we're like, this is amazing. Like, it's so simple. And it's like, it's so funny how simple this idea was, but it got to that bridge, and it was just that riff going, and Chizzy and I were like, yeah, that's it. I remember Chizzy and me saying, like, doesn't need anything else. That's perfect. That's awesome, kind of thing, right? Well, apparently we needed Zakk Wylde, or all this other stuff on it. But yeah, that was sort of like the first thing for that. And I don't know what we were expecting when we were going to go to Las Vegas. Like, I knew, obviously, Las Vegas, there are many ladies in the entertainment industry, so to speak, in Las Vegas. I knew there would be some of those on set, judging by the content of the song. So
when you saw the 1-page script of what was going to be going on, the video treatment,
one word treatment, strip. I think that was the an idea for the bridge in that song, was just strip. But so we kind of had an idea, and like at this point too, like we talk about someone who was like the guy who was working in the band. Like, I was always the one that had a job. Doug had little gigs like here and there or whatever, but I was always like, I was either going to school, thank you, OSAP, for all that's the student, that's the student loan service in Ontario or whatever. But I always had like a job and was always like throwing down for gas and rent and food. And sometimes Doug and Matt would just try to survive on so little, and I'd be like, you know what, no. I would go and buy food. Like, you need to eat vegetables, here's some milk. Like, they would just eat like crap, and I'd be like, dude, like, come, like, God, I'd chop up vegetables, and Doug's like, I can't replace this. I'm just like, just eat it, just eat the food, and don't be, feel better kind of thing, right? But by the time that happened, we were sort of subsisting on like we had like the record deal going, so like label was like paying our, it wasn't very much in rent or whatever, so we would get a little bit of coin each per month to spend or whatever, but it was like it was very, very little. So when we flew to Las Vegas, like, we were so poor, we had no money. We sort of had, but we had gear, we had clothes, we had all the things we needed. All that was provided for us. But like, as far as like having money in your pocket, like, there wasn't a whole lot of money going on. So like, we're in Las Vegas, just like glued to the people who we're with, because we're like, if we lose you, we don't have money to like get a cab or like get anywhere or whatever, right? So we go and we did this video, and like, that video was crazy. Like, I think it cost like $110,000 US by the end of it. It was supposed to be like 80 or 90, and it even went over budget. So and there was like crazy stuff going on. Like, they were getting like last minute booze sponsorships from like a tequila company. All of a sudden was just like, all right, here's 20 grand, put the bottle in the video, and all this kind of stuff happened, right? But I just remember we did the video, and this whole big crazy thing over a couple days, and then as soon as all the label people, everyone was gone, I was like, oh my God, we're poor again. I remember sitting at the Hard Rock waiting, after we check out from our rooms, and we're like, well, what do? We could go and get like a little bit of food. And I remember like scraping money together. I'm like, we gotta have a beer to celebrate. And I think I was the only one with like $20, and I spent like that last $20 and got us like a round of Corona, or the cheapest beer we could get. We're like, here we go, boys. All right, let's get to the airport and get home, because we have no money. We just had absolutely nothing left. But it was also a great time too. And then I think even from then too, it was like, and then we went home, and it wasn't even till it was like the end of June before we even went on tour. But then once that was 2010, June 30th, I remember leaving, and it was like, that was when things really started for real. It was like, we had, first tour, it was with Sick Puppies and a band called Janice and a band called It's Alive. And I remember hearing that, or seeing the video of the Free Hugs thing that Sick Puppies did back in the day, and they had a big song that was blowing up, and seeing the itinerary, and it's like, I'd been to the US, but like I hadn't been to the US like that before. So, piling, and we had this van we bought from a church. It was the church school bus, and it had 4 benches in this van, which was like, you have to have like a bus, like an F license now in Ontario to drive that, and let alone with a trailer, with this enormous trailer with it too, because we were essentially leaving. They were like, you're going away for like at least 6 months straight, and we were. I think it was 4.5 months when we were out on the road the first time like that, before we even like came home, and even then it was for like 4 days, and then we just went right back out, turned around or whatever, right? So we had this. We had nine dudes pile into this van with no air conditioning. It was, this is 2010, and this is like a 1995 GMC Rally van. That was the model of it, right? But yeah, and it was crazy because it was, we'd played shows before, but it wasn't like that because we were chasing the tour bus basically. So we had just enough time to sort of get loaded out, get everyone into a hotel, showered, and then get up at 9 a.m. and just start driving, or not sleep and just drive through the night straight. And again, thank God for Chizzy. Like, there were so many times where, like, we'd go to sleep and Chizzy's driving, and we wake up and Chizzy's still driving. He's sort of like, okay, we're almost there, boys. But that's, yeah, it's crazy all that build up time that took to sort of get to that first US tour. Like, that felt like a lifetime in itself, and now it feels like a lifetime since that first tour sort of happened, right? So, but that was an amazing thing to be, out on the road and just poor and having nothing, being signed and having all this support behind us, but like having no money, like personally come in, and yet have a song that's #1 at active rock radio in the US at the same time. But that was the real turning point when that happened. It's like, I think we were on tour with Hinder. I think it was Hinder. I think that's what it was. And it was like, we went from this sort of obscure band to all of a sudden, like, all the people at the shows knew about us and knew about that song, right? So it was sort of a perfect storm of things that really happened with that to sort of make that band, to make that at that time sort of blow up like that. So yeah, it's quite a journey.
It really is. I'm trying to, there's a few notes in there.
Yeah, sorry, I was just plowing.
No, because like we just started going with the train of thought, but the idea, because there's the flip side of it too. The idea of like, is this actually going to work out? Are things going to come together when not say you've been promised things, but just like you hope year after year, think this is going to be the year. The My Darkest Days gets signed, Porn Star Dancing, like that song blows up. The idea internally in the band, the flip side of it, when people are like, is this really happening right now? Like, it was like the surrealness of things.
It was very surreal, right? Like, it was, especially all that time of just like, opening and playing to empty bars and playing, all these and slugging it out. And that finally happens. And, there's also the sense at that time too, and we would be reminded of this too. It's like, it can still not work out. There's how many stories are there of bands that like, get signed and they have, something like that happen, and like it's still just nothing happens with it, right? We were lucky that, and good thing that we put in all that time, because we really proved ourselves as a band, because, having a song called Porn Star Dancing, obviously there's going to be a whole bunch of people that are going to be like, this band's a joke. Like, what is this? Hey, porn star. Like, people would think it was a joke and that we couldn't play. And so again, like, we didn't have it easy. Like, we would, we had to practice so hard to become like just so tight. And I think after that, like, there's a saying, like our old manager Chief would be like, well, there's nothing 50 shows can't fix. And he was right. Any issues that we had, it was like by the end of those first 50 shows, it was like, okay, no, we know. You sort of get into a groove of it, right? So, but yeah, we really had to prove ourselves, and probably just like give that like extra, like more, because people kind of expected it to be like a joke, or, oh, what do you guys, what someone said, well, oh, you guys trying to be like Motley Crue? And I was like, that'd be awesome. That would be great if we could have that kind of mega success or whatever. So, but yeah, we definitely had to try very hard to get where we were. And things ended up, unfortunately, with that band. Matt stepped into 3 Days Grace. I remember traveling, Doug and Reed and I went down to Buffalo to watch them, and Doug turned and he goes, well, we got to find a new lead singer, because it was temporary at the time. And you could tell it's like, no, this is going to really do something. Right. So unfortunately we had to, sort of regroup and figure things out. I'm sure Matt didn't, having his own project as opposed to stepping into another band, I'm sure it was hard decision for him to keep that up, but like, I get it. He, it's something that, I remember saying to him, because he felt bad, and I was like, well, you got to do it. Like, like,
these are opportunities.
You can't not do that. And so that was 2013, and we sort of had a house in Peterborough, and I was really thankful that I actually went and went to Humber and studied and, learned all that stuff, because I just sort of fell back on that, and I went, well, hired gun time. Now I'm going to do, sort of late coming around, like everyone that I went to school with. As soon as they got out of college, they didn't have the opportunity that I did for a band like that you're going to tour. So they had to make it for themselves. So they'd start doing hired gun stuff. And I was like, well, a little late to the party as far as everyone else was concerned, but it's like time to start, doing hired gun stuff. So I just sort of jumped right in and just started playing around, just Peterborough bands at the time. And then I got a gig with this through my friend Julian. He worked at Coalition Music in Toronto, and they had this artist named Andy, a pop artist, and she was on this show called Star Academy, and it was sort of like American Idol, like a singing contest, but also like Big Brother, and they got them to all live in a house together and filmed it was sort of weird, but like I go in for this rehearsal, or like I had to audition for it too, right? And someone I sort of knew, Sean Kelly, he was a guitar player for Nelly Furtado. He was in there, and he's sort of looking at me, and he's like, "I know you, dude. I know you." Sean, he's like totally like that, and I was like, "Oh, where from, Sean?" Because I knew and he's like, "And you know my name?" He's like, "Okay, I know you from somewhere," and he was like, "Oh, My Darkest Days," and I remember he goes, "You guys did okay, huh? You do all right." And I was like, "Yeah," but it was, I was really thanking. I was like, good thing I went and did that Humber thing, because it gave me that, if you can learn jazz, it really sets you up, like, if you have to learn other stuff, like it was everything, not to say it was easier, but it was like, it really sets you up. It gives you a lot of skills in your toolbox to sort of apply. So that was sort of the first hired gun gig that, I remember the first time we played, it was like, we auditioned, and then Eric Lawrence, her manager, he comes up and he goes, okay, he's like, well, like the audition's good. You want to come for like a rehearsal, and then like we got a show for you guys. And I was like, oh, really? Like, okay, because Canadian Music Week was the next week, so
yeah.
we auditioned, which they were kind of like, and the drummer and the guitar player that I auditioned with ended up getting the gig as well. So we kind of came as a package. So we're like, well, you guys kind of rehearsed during that audition process, so that's good. So you played before, and it was. I have to say, like, Andy made it easy. She's this little French Canadian girl, and she's like little, super short girl. But as soon as she would start singing, it's like she's just a powerhouse. Like, what a singer, man! Oh man! And she had these great songs she put together with Seb from Simple Plan. So we got to go, and we played a show right away. And I looked down at our first show at the showcase, and Quincy Jones is standing like right in front of me. He's sitting right at the front of the stage, like and I was like, oh, that's Quincy Jones. That's definitely Quincy Jones. Like, holy crap. And he was he was into it too. He loved Andy's voice or whatever. And when I got to do some great things with her, it was like we opened for Bryan Adams at Festival d'été. We Rock Voisine at some point,
Rock Voisine.
Yeah, exactly.
Heard that name in a while.
We got to do some great gigs, but that was a whole different experience, like being a hired gun, where it's like you're not part of the band. So that was sort of the start of my professional life, sort of doing hired gun stuff like that. And eventually it led to Classic Albums Live. And I got a bit of, as my friend Justin said, he goes, you have an oddly wide skill set, because I did a bunch of musical theater stuff. At the time, Craig Martin, the guy that does Classic Albums Live, he did like a musical theater show, and then I got a couple calls and started working for a few little companies around Toronto, and I played some. I got to play Oklahoma, I got to play Cabaret, I got to play all these like pit band gigs for musical theater stuff. So, but yeah, it was. It's very random when I start looking back at it. It's like rock guy, but like playing pit band stuff, doing pop stuff with the odd, and then there's like wedding bands and that sort of thing. And that all took me, that's up to like 2016, 2017, and then we started Deadset Society. Never say die at the time, but. And so that was like, that carried me until then, and then we sort of went, and it was weird. It was like a parallel too, because then we went out as Deadset, and we sort of did what My Darkest Days did at the start. We just got like a bunch of tours. You got a bunch of tours together, with
Shout out Nick Bell.
So, shout out Nick Bell. I mean, he really is the one that opened the door for us and made that sort of first tour happen with Another Lost Year, our friends, and we just started going at it and just playing, every, some full bars, some very empty bars,
not so full bars,
everything in between. And it was sort of, it's funny because it was sort of that parallel. We had a van with no air conditioning driving around in the summer sort of thing. And then that took us to my new band with Mike, Tense Machine, who, might be releasing some new music pretty soon.
Oh, shameless plug.
Shameless plug.
No, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do here. That's your job.
But that's quite a journey. Not to sort of downplay the last couple years, but it's like
that's another podcast.
That's a whole
we could talk about. Yeah, we could definitely talk about 2017. That's an hour and a half and stuff. I did want to ask you though. So, not to go back, My Darkest Days gets signed up until when Matt Walst gets the opportunity to front 3 Days Grace. What years? Like, what's our timeline there?
We're talking like late 2007, 2008. That's when the sort of Chad Kroeger spec 604 Records deal sort of happened. And then it was late 2009 when Island Def Jam Mercury Records came into the picture. Mid 2010 is when that first American tour happened. And that's taking us up to 2013, late 2013. That's when Matt took the 3 Days Grace opportunity. So then, 2014, 2015, 2016, that was just me like hired gun, just everything I could possibly get kind of thing for a really wide, like country music, pop things. My friend Leah started hiring me for St. Royals for like wedding gigs and events bands and that sort of thing too. So then then it was kind of a funny thing too, because then I'm back playing upright bass quite often. Right. And then, and I, how can I forget too, my friend Chris and Reed and I we had a band for a while called Streetlight Social. It was like, we sort of like my friend Chris is an amazing songwriter. He's written for 3 Days Grace, Fallen Angels, one of his songs with 3 Days Grace. And we figured out that Chris writes really amazing, like folk songs. He loved Mumford and Sons and all this music. And I'm like, well, I have an upright bass. And Reed was like, let's do it. Let's, so we started sort of doing that band as well. But, and then, so that takes us, that was like 2016, last Streetlight Social show. So it was, sorry, rewind. Where were we?
No,
Mike?
so I just want to say a couple things. Streetlight Social, I always loved the name of that band. I think great band names are few and far between, but I remember hearing that one, I'm like, that's a really good one.
And
again, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't.
That totally came from Chris was working at a bar in Peterborough, Spanky's, and he was like, typical Peterborough style, like the bar's closed and there's just people on the street just like still like going at it until the wee hours of the night. And he sort of was looking back at that and thinking like, we're all standing around like streetlight. He's like, it's like a streetlight social.
It's a great name. Chris Miller, that's the Chris we're talking about. And then for context, Reed, who was your bandmate in My Darkest Days and also singer of our band Deadset Society as well.
Deadset Society.
I do want to go back. It's not to go back to the timeline with My Darkest Days, but
that's okay.
You got signed around 2000. Because I think this is important for musicians and artists and people in bands. You get signed, so 2008 or 9 is kind of when things start taking off. Yeah. And then it kind of abruptly ends in 2013. Yeah, and we think about how many years go up to that. And as we were saying before, like things can sometimes just align and take off. And then sometimes things just happen. And it's like, that's an opportunity for Matt to join a band that's huge, and also just the way things were happening with 3 Days Grace. It's like the opportunity was there. His brother plays in the band. He's got close connections to it. I can only imagine what it's like to be in the room with 3 Days Grace and be like, so how do we move forward with this? Because you're going to have your obvious picks to start from. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if you're in My Darkest Days, like what's going through your mind when that comes up? Because again, going back to earlier, splitting it into two camps, where like some people might hate on it and some people might be like, sure, like that's awesome. Like obviously you want something for yourself too, but you're just like, that's a really good opportunity.
He obviously he had to take it, and I was very happy for them, but also like if I was saying it wasn't heartbreaking, I'd be lying. It was like all that work, all those years put into it. And it really was, it was like hard cutoff. And like, I virtually had to start over again and start building it back up. So, and it was, and like you said, like it's all relationships and who, and it was like just through a friend with Andy, and that sort of started that whole thing, right? So it was it was rough. There was a rough time, but it's like you kind of come to a point. It's like, do I, because I was 27, 20, almost 28 at that point in 2013 when that happened. So it was like you come to a crossroads, and it's like you can give up or you can keep going. And I don't think there was any question in my mind, but also at the same time, it was like, I'm kind of older in the game. Like you're not going to be getting any like pop gigs with like, the next big thing kind of thing. Right. But it's like, there was never a question in my mind that I would, keep going kind of thing. But there was a bit of doubt there and whatever. But it was like at that point, you either give up or you double down and you just dig in even harder kind of thing. And that's the path I decided to go on. It's like, well, it's, I've come this far. I might as well keep going. So.
No, it's interesting you say double down on it, because I remember it was like I kind of went through the music industry of having people 10, 15 years older than me. And then when I kind of approached, my late 27s, I started having people that were 10 years younger than me coming into the industry and asking questions about stuff and just how things work. And I remember just thinking like, there's times when you're going to see people stop doing music, and it's like early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, like mid 30s. A lot of people drop off because you start looking at it and go, did I get what I want out of this? Or is there still something that's kind of like, left to be done sort of thing? And you do see people doubling down on it and doubling down very hard on things as far as like what they want to do and stuff. And the idea of like, not saying that there may have been a silver lining to it, but the idea of being your age when, MDD kind of went on hiatus, it's like, that's kind of a sweet spot for musicians, because you're old enough and you're mature enough to not get yourself in trouble. Because like we know what it's like when you see young musicians that think you can go on tour and get into all the vices every single night and realize that that's not going to work, or not realize like things cost money, connections are important, like all these things that play into it. So when you start again, it's not like you're starting from zero without any knowledge. It's not a new game sort of thing. It's just like you're able to take everything that you've learned and move forward with it.
Yeah, for sure. Right. But it's, you very much like realize like you have to keep working, and if not like work even harder too. It's like, I remember the day after Matt, they sort of told us that Matt was going to be joining 3 Days Grace. I just remember picking up my bass the next day, and I was like, well, major scales, 2 octaves through 12 keys, back to master class at Humber. And I just started to, brush up on, I pulled the old fake book out, started going through some jazz stuff, because it was like, I have to use every tool that I have in my toolbox now. I have to pull those things out. I can't rely on, being in a rock band. I have to, branch out and get those things. So exactly. And you're a little older, like, okay, well now, like, I'm not going to be out like partying and drinking. I'm not going to be, doing, whatever. It's like, now I have like the work starts now. The work, like I really have to dig in and sort of make something happen. Right. So that's what I decided to do, for better or worse. But you know what? It's funny because everything sort of leads to a path. And I feel like we got to a really good place now with Tense Machine. And it's like, that wouldn't have happened if I just would have like stopped. And so it's like, you never, like, that's what I mean. I'm not to tell people like, oh, screw getting a job, don't do that. But it's like, keep working at it, because like, it's not like, take my story. Like that would have been so easy to be like, my life is over. Like everything's done when my darkest days ended. But it's like, it's not. If you got to keep going, and you got to keep working, and like just be a good person and work hard, and like stuff will work out. You'll make something happen. But it's, and it's like, the path is never like, it's not a straight path in entertainment, right? Like I'm a perfect example of that, right? Like it's been, if you would have came to me in 2006 and said, hey, this is how it's going to go, I would have been like, what are you talking about? No, that's, none of that stuff's going to happen. Right. But it's like twists, turns, up, downs, and whatever. But it's like the main thing, you just got to keep your head up and keep working through it, and it'll work out. But it's not going to be the path that you thought it was. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Right?
There's one time where you're playing Madison Square Garden on a massive tour.
That's right.
And there's another one where you're playing to 3 people, and you can tell the promoter at the venue is just trying to figure out how to not pay you.
Yeah.
And it's just like, right. There's so much in between there for musicians. Cause you think that when things are like on the up, they're always going to stay there. It's like things can take off really quick. Things can pull back just as fast. So just being humble. And that's one of the things of touring with you and stuff. It's just like that even keel as far as like, adjust the highs and just, figure out the lows of what's going on. Just, it can always get better, but you can always get worse. So just enjoy the moment.
Get worse. Yeah, enjoy the moment and be good to everyone, because you never know who's going to be a connection. You should nurture all those connections and just try to be good to everyone. So, and that's, it made me realize as well, I'd go out on the road with Andy, and Andy really said, there's always be like a tech or sound guy, someone I'd always like. Andy's just like, you always know everyone. You always know. We go, the photographers, everyone at all these venues, all these gigs. And I'm just like, yeah, it's just years, I guess, of you don't realize that you kind of look back and you're just like, yeah, there's just so many shows. So to
tie it in, I've had you here for about 90 minutes. There's a couple more questions, but I'll limit it to one because I'm gonna get you for part 2 at some point. Because we're all keeping our fingers and toes crossed to get back out on the road. A new band looking to go and tour, a couple pieces of advice that you would give them. And what I mean by tour is like you haven't gone out long enough to need to do laundry. One of those tours,
yeah.
You're out for a bit.
Get a vehicle. Learn how to change a tire. Learn how to do an oil change. Those are a couple things where if like My Darkest Days, the fact that just gave us a big leg up is we had a really like a Grand Caravan, super not cool looking vehicle, not sexy, but like it worked and it was very cheap to run, and that enabled us to do so much stuff, right? And I mean, and be nice to everyone. And like have your stuff together. How many times have you seen at venues where there's like dude loading his amp and he's got a beer in his hand? Put the beer down. Put the beer down and be.
You're at work.
Yeah, you go. That's a good thing. Is go at it like you're at work, like it is a job. I know it's music and it's fun, and you think it should be fun. Or I actually had there was an artist in residence that came to Humber, and he said. He gets up and he goes, my job isn't fun. It's not fun. I'm not here to have fun. And this is Dave Liebman, saxophone player who's played with like Miles Davis and everything. He's like, I'm not here to have fun. He said, I enjoy what I do, but this is not fun. That's not what I'm out to do. And he's like, that's what makes a career in music great, is that you can enjoy it. But he's like, if you're, not to say you shouldn't have fun, but if you're having too much fun, maybe you're not taking care of some of the things that need to be taken care of. And obviously, like, everyone has to learn this lesson for themselves. And with My Darkest Days, we had some fun. We had lots of fun. But there is a point when you get to and you go, okay, maybe some of this stuff is too much fun. Maybe we've, had too much to drink, and we need to lay off of that stuff, because all of that stuff can and will probably sink you in the end. But it's like, I think if you just really, not trying to suck up to people, but like walk away with people going, those guys were solid, work hard, play hard, whatever, is your thing. But like, you want to walk away from those tours and make positive connections, because those will help you down the road,
I think that's an excellent place to wrap things up here, Brendan.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's be good at loadout. Be good at load in and load out. That's like, honestly, like, be great on stage. That would be my advice too. But like, be great at the things around the stage too. Like, that was like, Ian Thornley used to have us open for him all the time, and that was one of the things, because he'd be like, you guys just like get up and play and get off and get your gear away like fast, and it's never a problem. And that was like, we would just get gigs probably because of that. Honestly,
No, and
we had such a system with that going on. So
just thinking about it, it's just like, I'm a big believer, just watch what the pros are doing. Don't listen to people as much as watch what people do. Mm-hmm. And when you see because again, you've done some of these big tours, and just like, you don't see people screwing around on these big tours when they're loading and loading out, building the stage, doing stuff. Because there's definitely, as you're saying, there's times to have fun, but a good chunk of it, it's like, if too many people are screwing around, things get lost, broken, stolen, people get hurt. It's like, make sure everyone's because that's the team mentality of things. And with bands, when you see bands that are out on the quote unquote my first tour and they're having a little too much fun, it's like just wait until it bites on the backside sort of thing.
Yeah,
because it's just
you don't want to be
of
sent
time.
home because that can happen.
That's a whole other thing, and that's probably a whole other podcast. Brendan, where can everyone find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Brendan McMillan. I have a page. I try to use that more. I have a profile that's getting close to 5,000 friends, so I'm going to combine them and make a super
dump it off
page. But you can find me on Instagram, B McMillan Music. Same on Twitter, B McMillan Music, and go check out the website, BrendanMcMillan.com.
Excellent, Brendan. Thank you so much.
Thanks
for joining us tonight. Thanks again for everyone for tuning in, taking part in the chat. Anything we didn't see, any of the questions we didn't see in the chat, we'll get back around to those and answer those.
I was so busy talking, I didn't really.
I know.
Really I'll go over them.
There's so much. There's stuff in there, but I to go back an hour and a half right now, we can just hop in, especially on Facebook. There's quite a few on there. Yeah. Again, thanks again. Our guest tonight, bassist, songwriter, all-around musician, Brendan McMillan. My name is Mike Langford. This has been DearBands Live. That is our time tonight.
I love the jazz, by the way.
Thanks for watching. It helps. It's my comfort.
Oscar Peterson it sounded like Oscar Peterson anyway before. And
it is not Oscar Peterson because it's copyright-free, royalty-free music.
Well, they were. It was someone who had studied Oscar a lot. That's my jam.
All right, thanks everybody. Talk to you later.